I finished reading Remarkably Bright Creatures earlier today. I finished listening to it. I was skeptical about finishing it. I continued to be for most of the rest of it. I think it's good that I finished it. I have mixed feelings, I think. I have some conflicting feelings about it. I think one of the things I felt throughout a lot of the novel was, and I talked about this before, this sense of this feeling that there was some kind of boundary. It almost felt like a scripted family show, sitcom or not a sitcom, but some kind of like that it felt generic. And I think that sense was a kind of lack of intimacy. I think it felt, a lot of this book feels almost censored. And I think, at least from Tova's perspective, and I think that feeling comes from this sense that she's a woman who's, living alone later in life. She's experienced the tragedy of her son's death that was named a suicide, but which she didn't believe. That kind of trauma and uncertainty and emotional instability, that even his memory is kind of framed in this kind of uncertainty about responsibility and relationship, and what it says about him and what it says about her. And then that she was with her husband for another 28 years before he died of cancer. And she kind of alludes to this grueling chemo process and his deterioration, and that she's clearly someone who even her whole thing with Ethan, which I'm whatever, is that she was so bonded to him, she was so tied to him that she can't imagine being with him, and that all of the ways that she remembers him feel so mild. It's a positive, oh, what a silly thing he said, or we used to fight about the stacks of papers, oh, what a that there was something in Tova that felt tempered and censored, and I think in kind of the last 20% of this novel, maybe, I think kind of clarity around that, the fact that that it kind of pushes her to change her relationships with Ethan and to be less of a need for control, and that she hadn't driven, and since she'd driven her husband the last time to the hospital, there's all of these things that are kind of caging her in. And I think there's been a sense of just absolute almost contentment with the sense that, a kind of contentment that this is just how her life is. And I think the fact that her brother died in this nursing hospital, and she was pretty much estranged with him, and then she just decides she's gonna go and also live there and sell the house that she's had for 30 years, and which is a very practical decision, so it kind of aligns with her character. But it does, I don't know that her feelings around it are ever really illuminated, at least in during the process. So it, at least to me, and maybe I missed something because I was listening to it, it seemed like she was okay, now I'm gonna sell the house and move there, it's practical, so I'm just gonna do it. And it felt like there was some kind of emotional arc that never occurred. And so I think something that I was feeling in the second half of this novel, before it got to the end, was this looming sense of tightness and constriction. And I just kept thinking about, my mind immediately went to Margaret Atwood's Surfacing, and then also Edible Woman, because I think, like, similarly, those are two books where there's kind of this woman who's in her life, who's kind of participating in this sort of expectation and responsibility of womanhood, and trying to figure out what that means for her. And they end with this sort of explosive, like, external release of this growing constraint and feelings of constriction. And so I think there was kind of this sense where Tova felt unreal because she was emotionally absent, I think, for most of the book. We don't ever really know how she feels. We know what she feels about it's sad that her son is dead. And I don't think it's until she gets the information that there was a girl that was with Eric, that he might have known, that he might have been dating, that he had some relationship with, and she doesn't have the name. And then it's being revealed to us when she goes and meets Ethan that she's been spending days searching the internet and searching resources for this woman, which does feel like, I guess she's old. She doesn't know how to use it, which feels a little crazy. But that felt almost like, I almost felt like finally here's this woman that's like expressing, or like that is responding to her past in some way. And I think partly with the conclusion being so centered on her, it's changing in so many ways, of like that she can release some of this need to control, and that's part of all the cleaning, is this obsessiveness, control, and being in this house, and isolating herself from Ethan. And like now she's opened up really, and she can build these connections because she's like she's been able to grieve. And there is that moment in the end too, when she finds Camp's license, where she's like sobbing. Like that's her first kind of emotional release that we get. And so I think part of it is that in some ways I feel frustrated by that. I wish that we as the reader had been let in with greater intimacy into Tova's life. Or not into her life, but into her psyche and her emotions. Like, I think that's what I was feeling, that was just this, like, yeah, just a disconnect, just a barrier, like that there was this kind of censor. And I think it's that, like, that's the story, is that she maintained that within herself, that she did not allow herself, in her grief, any kind of emotional response or connection or growth, that she is a woman in a lot of ways stuck in time, in the moment of this tragedy. And she's been able to kind of get by for the 30 years, like by this sense of, by her kind of wanting to isolate. But even that, like she continued to be go to the Nitwits for 30 years, or like that she wasn't so much isolating as just an avoidance of change and like the absence of change, it would seem. So I think that is kind of her character. And in some ways, my mom reminded me, I was telling her about it, and because it did make me think of like, and part of my being too critical is it kind of the responsibility of the author to write a character with greater a kind of emotional sensibility. Like, is it a writing issue, or is it a choice? Does it serve the book? Does it serve the story? I think it kind of functions to, like, it makes sense. It's something that makes sense. I think I just don't totally like that choice in the storytelling. Like, I think that it's not necessarily wrong. I just want more. I want Tova to feel more connected to her. But what I was saying is that, like, is this as a choice, like a reflection of this kind of silent generation of women that did live their lives, you know, never really, and I think a lot of, like, when would that be? Like, born in the 40s, 50s, maybe 60s, of women that felt, whose opportunities to be expressive and emotional, and just like obscene, almost, like any ability to kind of stray from the mold provided is like unacceptable. And it makes me think of like kind of Atwood's books, a lot of hers especially, and a few other of these, whose am I thinking of? God, I can't remember. But just this sense of unease that exists in stories of a woman's life. Oh, also, like The Vegetarian by Han Kang feels very similar. I think this growing tension, unsustainability of maintaining the facade, maintaining the character of a woman that's kind of just normalized or expected, of how to exist, and the policing of, I think, of women's emotions as well as their character, and that it functions as a like, in this kind of responsibility to remain polite and not a burden. That's something that Tova says at one point, of like not wanting to burden her friends. She's like, well, it's not a burden. Like, that sense of not letting yourself be a problem, of shrinking so as to not like bother anyone else's, to not let your existence be a bother. There's kind of, I think, the underlying sort of culture, I think, in the ways that girls AFAB are traditionally kind of raised is, and I would say this is like, this is kind of the movement of, you know, the feminist movements of the 80s and 90s, of expanding, of releasing that kind of constraint and the societal pressure to shrink and invisibilize and provide without complaint, and to accept these responsibilities unconditionally, and that you have a certain temperament. Like all of these, I mean, I think that you can, I would say that, yeah, a lot of that is even reflected in like Jane Austen, or in Pride and Prejudice, I think in some ways. I started reading Emma, I never finished it. But of like the Bronte sisters as well, I think. And Virginia Woolf, absolutely. These of like, I think what I've noticed in older white women's writing is that a lot of it for a long time is kind of how to take the normalcy of what a woman's life is expected to be and reveal the chaos and the obscenity and the grossness and the rage that not only exists but that is fueled by this form of isolation. Even in like, I have a book of short sci-fi stories of like some of the original, like old women's sci-fi, or sci-fi written by women in like the 19th century. And like there's a, like where you see women's writing, I think prior to like really the 80s and 90s. And again, like this is, I think, largely what I've noticed in white women's writing. And I think that part of that is this balancing, being both in a position of privilege as well as hierarchically inferior. And so navigating like that white privilege of being in the white male space, of being akin to success and wealth and the opportunities to grow, while being restrained by that. And that to achieve success is going to largely be determined by that man's success. I mean, I think even like that Tova's like, even though she had these friends, I don't know. She was so, like, the fact that it was cleaning, this obsessive, this compulsive cleaning feels, and that, like, that's what she did at Ethan's, thinking, like, I'm doing a good thing. I want to do this. And then him, like, her fucking up and getting pissed off at the fact that she's doing the thing that not only offers her control, but that kind of affirms her as like being acceptable as existing in the world, feels reflective of that. And so I think that's part of it too, is that like in a lot of ways I see her as like, she is a character that makes sense to me, that I can kind of understand her motivations and her responses and her behaviors and her kind of lack of intimacy and connection. But I think I also expect more maybe of her, but I think also of Van Pelt, of the author. I think in some way, and this is my opinion, so I know that a lot of people love and appreciate this book, and for the same reasons that we watch lots of like kind of shitty TV that's not fair. I don't think it's a shitty book, but like kind of shitty TV shows, like, you know, scripted shows, like why we're attracted to things that don't necessarily give us that intimacy is partly as like entertainment, but I think also is sort of a glimpse into a world of that things turn out differently without necessarily bringing in so much like such precision and nuance to what that emotional growth might feel like, if that's making any sense. I don't know. That's where I'm like, I have conflicted feelings. I think she makes sense, and maybe it's like just me as a reader wanting more, maybe expecting more, and I think that's because a lot of where I see like connections with this book are books that are 40, 50, 100 years old. And so I kind of just expect a more nuanced portrayal of Tova. Like that she's not just an old woman and her kid died and her husband died and now she works there. Like, what does that mean to her as a person in her, like, that is just kind of like, there's just something, it just lacks so much depth. And I don't believe, which I think is kind of the way that she's written, is that sort of that depth is hidden, or that it doesn't exist. And so that's kind of how she portrays, like, presents herself to those around her. But I expect, or I want more as a reader, that if you're going to be written, if this is the character, I want to understand her a little better, because she doesn't feel like the women I know. She doesn't feel complete. She doesn't feel complex enough. It feels like in a lot of ways she's been toned down. She's been censored. And I want more complexity. That she's not just a woman who likes cleaning and plays word games, and then her character growth is that now she sometimes lets the dishes sit and she'll play the word game on her phone. Like, whatever. I don't find that particularly compelling or necessarily true. Like, it feels a little bit superficial. And so I just kind of expected more. With Cam, Jesus fucking Christ, I think he sucks. And I don't think he's redeemable just because has a photographic memory or is really smart or whatever. Like, that's not redeeming to me. Or that, like, he finally decided to not just be an asshole. Like, okay, you've learned a sense of responsibility. Like, maybe I'm just not generous enough to a 30-year-old man who's, like, had a decent life, had a lot of opportunity, like, has close relationships in his life, has someone that cared for him to continue to be so callous and cool towards his like, how have you as a 30-year-old man not learned in some way that, like, addicts are more complex people than just, like, shitty, horrible, like, I get being emotionally stunted. Maybe I just don't know enough men to know, like, this is how 30-year-old men act. I don't know. But I don't care. I do not care. I do not have sympathy for him for, like, finally at 30 getting his shit together. You've been an asshole. You're so lucky. And he continues to be self-pitying and resentful of his mother. And, like, that it takes Avery, a mom, to be like, for him to be like, oh shit, maybe being a mom is hard. And then to, like, Like, she what? Like, she doesn't answer his phone call, and he decides, or she doesn't respond, and she ghosts him, and so he's gonna leave. Like, you know her kid. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like, you're such a prick. And then he's mean to Ethan. Like, he's mean to everyone. And everyone gives chances over and over and over again. And then he's like, why doesn't anyone care that I'm so smart? Like, he didn't go to college. Because he didn't fill out the forms. Like, I get executive functioning is hard. Lots of people have issues with that. But fuck you, dude. You were going to get a full ride. You couldn't figure out the forms. And I'm a little like Aunt Jean. You can't just tell him he has to do it and then be pissed off he didn't. Like, sit your ass down with him and put that pen in his hand and say, fill this shit out. So I'm a little like, what the fuck? How did you fuck that up so bad? And I get it. It happens. Like, executive function. But just that this is his excuse of like, I can't do forms and I can't have responsibilities. But I don't know why no one will like let me work, even though I don't feel a responsibility to like communicate to anyone, and will actually just act on my emotional instability and my like tantrums, and then like that it just is fine. Things just work out for him. Like, that's it. That's really it. He has additional people that will, like, give him money and care for him. Like, I'm just like, okay, dude. Like, I get mental, and, like, I think part of what I did think was interesting is, that he is, like, so self-hating. He has such extraordinarily low self-esteem. Like, calling himself a piece of, like, it's so low, which sucks. But I have been thinking about, because I just watched Ronnie Chang's Netflix special, his most recent, and he has a joke that he has a bit for a while about, like, how all men are just, like, one YouTube video away from, like, storming the Capitol, like, from extremism, essentially. And I'm like, it's a bit, like, he's being funny, but there is a part where he's like, you all have a friend, like, you know, you ever just look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, you're a piece of shit and you deserve to die. And then it's like, and then you go to watch a video about how to do tricep curls, and then suddenly they're telling you, like, all women are horrible, like, whatever Andrew Tate bullshit. And he's like, you know that on a bad day, you're like 2 videos away from becoming that. Or like a week away. And I'm just kind of like, is that true? Is that true? Like, is this, like, level of low, like, truly self-hating, low self-esteem, and also that you are, like, so easily manipulated, like, that your own morals and, like, values are so easily corrupted? Like, is that true? I don't know. To be quite honest, I do not know enough men to know that that is true, and I do not read enough things about men. It is fast. It wouldn't surprise me. Like, I do think that is what it takes to be, like, to be a big, you know, cool, scary dude, is to, like, not give a shit and not have emotions, and that level of, like, suppression, and, like, emotional isolation is really harmful. And so then I can kind of understand that, like, that, like, that what it means to suppress those pieces of yourself is to hate them. And if those pieces refuse to go away, as hard as you try to erase them, then that is bitch, you hate yourself. Love yourself. BTS said love yourself. RuPaul said love yourself. And these boys out here not loving themselves. And like, is that the norm? Of like, that you're just so angry at the world for not making your life easier. You're angry at your addict mom for being an addict. You're angry at your aunt for not being your mom. Like, and you're pissed that everyone else is like, there's so many moments of him being like, I watched all the people pass by, walking around the mall, having their normal lives. Everyone's life is so happy except mine, because I suck. And I'm like, piece of shit. And I'm just like, okay, first of all, do you have like no awareness that like people have lives outside of what you see? Like, that feels so like egotistical to just be like, isn't ever like, that's so interesting. Like, is that how you're going around seeing the world? Is that how men go around? Is that just Cameron? Like, it feels in some ways unfamiliar to me. Which isn't fair. That's not true. Like, I have felt that, but I felt that when I was 15. And so I think it's hard for me to be sympathetic to a grown man who's like lived a life and met people and interact. Like, have you never had anyone in your life like have a bad experience other than yourself? I just don't understand. Have you never? Like, I get he's got his friends and they're all happy with a baby, and then like Gene. Like, do you know no one else? Where you like learn about them and you're like, oh, your life is hard. Like, you've had experiences that are difficult, and then like reflected on how that interacts with your own life and your own experience. Like, that feels fundamental. Is that not happening? Am I crazy? Like, I don't know. So, I think he sucks. I don't really give a shit that, like, I just don't care. I don't care about him. Like, good for him. He's all happy now and whatever. I'm happy to not have to read anything with him again. This is why I don't. Oh, I hated it. I hated how he talked about Avery. I hated how he talked to her. Like, am I not being compassionate enough to the plights of cishet white men and their self-hatred? And also, but also like how that, like, you can't just, yes you can. You can't just hate the world because you hate yourself. They do it all the time. That's what they be doing. So I just, whatever. I think the octopus, Marcel, I am not sold by the choice to make him a like posh, kind of asshole, at least I don't know. I don't fully understand. No, what I don't understand is the like journal entries. Where are they happening? And then he kind of like breaks the fourth wall or whatever, and he like starts talking to you as the reader. I'm like, are we reading these? Are you telling these to us? Like, I don't understand. I don't know that made a lot of sense. I guess it helped for passage of time, but I didn't understand that. Love him being released. Love free Marcellus. Thrilled for free Marcellus. He was almost more interesting. Where it's like, actually his capture was perceived as his freedom from the fact that he like was physically hurt in his effort to like find it. Like, that's more interesting. And we stopped getting him like halfway through. Got like 3 at the end, like where I'm just like, I don't know. Cool. That's super interesting. I wish you'd said more about that. Like, Marcellus was working his ass off to do a good deed. Jesus Christ. For these dumbasses. Also, like, just want to bring in that, like, that she had money. She had money. She had a house she had so much money. Girl. I appreciate that rich people also have problems. I get it. There was a part of me that was like, I don't know why you're flexing on us. I don't know why you're like, yeah, here's this woman, too old. She is a grieving mother. But she is really weird about it and still chooses to like work as a janitor even though she doesn't have to, and just does nothing with it and amasses wealth, and then it's like, oh, I had all this money, so I just helped with all. Like, okay, sure, why not? Why fucking not? Why not make her rich? You know, I guess that's as much sense as her character can make. You would have to be like, it was I don't know how I feel about them. It's whatever. I finished it. I have no idea what I'm going to listen to next. I'm reading Chrysalis, about a woman, Maria Sibylla Marion, who did some of the first research on the metamorphosis of moths and butterflies in 1699 and 1700. Like, fascinating. I'm reading that, and I'm reading this like short, I think Russian translated novella that's a like super weird, like experimental sci-fi kind of whatever. So that's cool. I don't know what I'll listen to next. I'll probably go and search through the pictures I have of what looks interesting, or who knows. Whatever. I'll listen to something. Maybe I'll finish. I swear I've got like at least 3 or 4 audiobooks from the last year that I started and never finished. And not necessarily that I didn't. There were a couple I quit because I was like, this sucks ass, and there were a couple that were too sad that I couldn't get through. So maybe I'll do a memoir. I've been going back and forth. I've been considering RuPaul's memoir and Britney's memoir, but I'm pretty picky with memoirs. I'm not always a fan. I'm usually not, because I get too caught into the writing, and I prefer like fiction to be fiction and nonfiction. I have a hard time with this like gray area of some, like, I prefer, if you're going to like add in fictitious pieces, that it just be a piece of fiction. But that's just me. All right.